Hare Krishna and good evening, devotees. Thank you so much for joining us for our 7th episode of the Many Moon podcast. And tonight, our topic is the Vedic Woman. Is it ideal or is it unattainable? And our guest speaker tonight is Garuda Prabhu, who is a very well-known scholar and also has been involved in the Hare Krishna movement, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada for many years. Now, as most of us know, Srila Prabhupada dramatically underscored that you are not the body. Then, how do we deal with the fact that we are living within our bodies? So some are propagating that following Vedic culture and gender norms is almost like a panacea for solving all of ISKCON's social issues and devotees' dilemmas regarding to how to, practice our Krishna consciousness while we're not the body within our bodies. However, how does Vaishnava culture and Vedic culture always align? Will being Vedic always help Vaishnavis to flourish? And do we even know what Vedic culture is? So Garuda Prabhu, for those of you that are not familiar with him, has been practicing Bhakti Yoga for 50 years. He received both Harinam and Brahminical initiation from Srila Prabhupada. He was also blessed by Srila Prabhupada to enter the academic world, where he eventually received 3 master's degrees and a doctorate in comparative religion from Harvard University. From there on, he became the first Bhakta to become an established university professor, now holding 2 university positions, and he was also the first Bhakta to publish books on Krishna Bhakti with a world-class academic and trade publisher. Since then, he's been guiding younger devotee scholars and has become the gatekeeper for academic Krishna Bhakti-related publications, and a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada bestowed on him the title of Kaviraj. Over the years, he has served as a consultant for ISKCON leadership and as a guide for devotional writing. He has also counseled hundreds of ISKCON devotees in a professional counseling capacity. He is an original member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute group established by Bhakti Sarup Damodar Goswami. He has had a long-standing relationship with the BBT since 1982, including 2 major BBT grants. He is invited to lecture around the world at ISKCON temples, yoga centers, and major universities and institutions such as the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where he has offered over 3 dozen lectures. So Garuda Prabhu is clearly someone that is highly knowledgeable in the field of Indian religion and religion in general, and is still very active within the devotee and the academic world. So now our first question for someone that is, specialized in Indian religion, Indian culture, what would you say are the key defining characteristics of Vedic culture, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, Sharadiya Rasa and Dee. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss these, rather difficult and challenging topics. And I've been addressing these topics for decades, honestly. So the Vedic culture, what we call the Vedic culture, would be something that would be taking place during one of the 4 yugas, the Dwapara Yuga, and even prior to that. But Vedic culture, is something that isn't exactly definable in terms of certain formulas. I think we tend to get very formulaic about these sort of things. But Vedic culture existed at a time when human lives were purportedly much longer. People lived longer. Society, it was a different yuga. Dwapara Yuga was a much more, compared to Kali Yuga, much more peaceful. And Vedic society was a society that didn't implicate you toward sin, but implicated you toward liberation. That is to say, over the course of many lifetimes, you would be always taking a higher birth, and ultimately to attain some level of salvation. Whereas in Kali Yuga, everything degrades. In Vedic civilization, the ideal was that everything elevates. So there was a design in Vedic culture, a social design, a political design, a religious design that would contribute to the elevation of all living beings in that culture at that time. In Kali Yuga, this is not possible. It is simply not possible. People live shorter lives. Things become more and more degraded. And therefore, Mahaprabhu comes along to give the ultimate practice of Sankirtan Yajna. So that's my quick response. But I can go into things in detail if you want. But that's my quick response.
Okay, then the one follow-up question from that is that you mentioned that we tend to think of culture and Vedic culture in terms of formulas. So a question that I have that's related, was Vedic culture something that was fixed, or was Vedic culture more fluid and changing
Okay, now
and evolving over time?
I'm having a difficult time hearing you, Sharadiya Rasa. Your voice is sounding somewhat muted, not fully muted, but somewhat muted.
I think probably the question was that whether the Vedic culture was fluid, or was it? Do you think it was static? Or was there some degree of fluidity in Vedic culture? Was her question. And
Okay.
yes, Charadia, you were a little bit muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but D is nicely translated your muted language for me. So thank you. You know, we sometimes, when we look back at Vedic culture, we tend to give it a kind of reification. That is to say, making it more concrete and static than it really was. The fact is that human beings are fluid. There are just a lot of variations, no matter what period of time we're talking about. The question really is, in what direction are those variations moving? But yes, in Vedic culture, what actually was occurring back then and what we mean by Vedic culture now typically tends to be very very different. We tend to give a Vedic culture a kind of ideal, pristine, perfect order of society. It had its own struggles, and it accommodated those struggles back then as it could do relative to its age. But there aren't fixed roles like we often think that there were. This fixedness is a kind of reification, which is dangerous, because too often we are projecting what we wish it to be onto what it actually was. And what we wish it to be is often a result of our own inabilities, our own inadequacies. And that's not a healthy thing to do. That is a result of repression. And as you know, Krishna gives Arjuna the rhetorical question in the Gita: what can repression accomplish? Well, if you were to answer that rhetorical question, destructiveness, negative things. So that's why I'm delighted that you're educating people in this kind of podcast. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Prabhu. One of the questions that leads from what you just described was from the Vedic culture, that Vaishnavism, as we all know, is one of the major traditions within the broader Vedic culture. So, what are the essential differences between Vedic and Vaishnava culture? Because they're both being used, in very closely, loosely linked together.
Yeah.
So I personally sometimes get the wrong end of the stick. So it'll be really good to hear from an academic, what are the main differences between the Vedic and the Vaishnava culture?
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the whole of Prabhupada's teachings for a second to answer that, to respond to that. In my analysis, and a long time ago, I wrote a Back to Godhead article on this, and I forgot what it's called. I think it's called Dharma, Nature, Duty, and Divine Service. Dharma, Nature, Duty, and Divine Service. Wow, I can't believe I remember it. It was all the way back in 1978 or something like that, but or 1980, something like that. In any case, what I pointed out there and what I pointed out then, because by that time we had all of Prabhupada's books, and I studied them very, very carefully in terms of this issue. Prabhupada speaks of the Vedic and the Varnashrama, and Varnashrama is an important word. We have to really talk about that, bring that into the mix also, D, because Vedic, Varnashrama, and Vaishnavism all get conflated too easily, and they're all very different. But Varnashrama and Vedic are definitely closer because the Vedic society pursued a Varnashrama system in a stricter sense, in a more structured sense. Now, that said, Varnashrama was possible in the Dwapara Yuga. It was possible to have society structured in the form of a human body. And the body of society would be, the legs were the skilled energy, the skilled workers, the workers that served the upper three varnas. And then moving up, the stomach was considered the Vaishyas, and the arms, the Kshatriyas. Vaishyas, the tradespersons, business. The arms, the rulers, the governors, the Kshatriyas. And then, of course, the head, the Brahmanas, the educating class. Okay, so and it was very cohesive. A society back then had a blend that really worked beautifully. And again, one was reborn into higher and higher states, which represented higher and higher levels of awareness and breadth of awareness, all the way up to the top. And Brahmanas were called Brahmanas because they were focused, because they realized Brahman. That's why they're called Brahmanas. It's a strengthened form in Sanskrit. You strengthen the vowels and it strengthens the meaning. So there's a correlation between the actual language and the referent that is being invoked. So Brahmanas, by this time, your Kshatriyas have to be aware of the world, ultimately. Rulers have to be aware of the world, but they don't go higher than that. But the Brahmanas are aware of transcendence and of Brahman. So there are greater and lesser realms of awareness, or what we could invoke from the Bhagavad Gita as kshetras, spheres of awareness. We're all kshetragyas, but depending upon the particular task we have in the world, or dharma, swadharma, the very reason for which we were put here in the world in terms of worldly functions. So those work beautifully in Vedic times. Varnashrama is then spoken of by Prabhupada as something that is natural, that every society has these four divisions. Even communist societies have these four divisions, but they're imperfectly executed, imperfectly organized, but it's just the nature of human society. So you're going to have these four divisions there in society, and also with ashram. Typically the first quarter of one's life, one is a student. The second quarter, one is in the world vocationally, and one is setting up a family. That's typically the second quarter. And the third quarter is where you're kind of now beginning to slow things down and move toward retirement. In the fourth quarter, you give your life fully and totally to spiritual things. Now, of course, this gets perverted in modern society, and but in Vedic times, it was very orderly, relatively speaking, and very successfully elevating human beings to salvation. So the second kind of varnashrama is where it's natural, it's in society, whether you like it or not, it's going to be there, but we may not take advantage of that. Then there's Daiva Varnashrama, and that's the third way that Prabhupada speaks of it. And this is spoken of in the Chaitanya Charitamrita specifically. Daiva Varnashrama is more equal to bhakti and to the life of Krishna Bhakti. The life of Krishna Bhakti is supported by the idea of Daiva Varnashrama. Vedic Varnashrama is not possible in this age, period. Okay, so am I allowed to make absolute statements in this podcast? Vedic Varnashrama is simply not possible.
So why is it not possible, Prabhu? Maybe I know some of our viewers would like this clarification, because whether we like it or not, there is this, particularly within ISKCON, there's this obsession about Vedic culture. Everything needs to be Vedic. We kind of idolize the Vedic culture. So you just mentioned one of the key things within the Vedic culture was that focus on Varnashram, whereas we, or the Chaitanya Charitamrita or Prabhupada, also mentioned on this concept of Devi Varnashram. So what's the difference between Deva Varnashram and Varnashram, and why, your very absolute statement, why is Varnashram Dharma as in Vedic times not possible in the Kali Yuga?
Okay. So as mentioned earlier, life is short in Kali Yuga. Everything is implicated toward degradation. It's sort of like an emergency. When you go to the hospital and you have a little cut on your arm, I mean, you can sit in the waiting room, you can take longer time, the doctors finally, you get registered, the doctor, you're not about to die, In Kali Yuga, life is short. There is an exigent need to take to spiritual life. There's no time to waste. Kali Yuga is also pulling at us and trying to pull us down. It's a very degrading time. Human beings have devised in Kali Yuga every conceivable way of hurting, torturing, and killing other human beings. It's a very degrading time. It's an age of quarrel, as it's stated in the Bhagavatam. It's an age of quarrel. Quarrel leads to tensions and fighting and so on. And the war that Arjuna had to deal with in Kurukshetra, that war is raging on in the hearts of persons within Kali Yuga. And that's why it's an emergency. So this is like a trauma clinic of the yugas. You got to go right in there and take up the chanting of the holy names. That's the emergency services that we need in this age. We do not have the time to pursue Vedic Varnashrama, nor the ability, by the way. Do you think that the sannyasis we have in this movement are Vedic sannyasis? They are not Vedic sannyasis. First of all, they should be out in the forest. Second of all, they should not be anywhere near women. Third of all, they should not ever cross water. Fourth of all, they should be begging alms. Fifth, there's so many requirements of sannyasis that are not adhered to by our sannyasis. So what are they? Are they sannyasis? Are they Vedic sannyasis? Absolutely not. Are they Vaishnava sannyasis? Well, yes, of course. They're Vaishnava sannyasis. And you know what? There's a huge variety in the types of sannyasis that are out there, as there are a huge variety of grihastas. I know grihastas that are very different than me, and that's fine. I have the privilege of going out into the world and teaching Bhagavad Gita at the university. Now, how bad a job is that? Right? That's a pretty spoiled, that's a pretty spoiled position. And, wherever I go and lecture, what do I have to lecture on? Bhagavad Gita, Krishna Bhakti theology. Well, I'm very fortunate. Now, of course, I worked hard to do that. And not everyone will have the propensity or interest or proclivity to do that. Some people have the proclivity to make money, and then they can make donations and they can support others who are doing this kind of work or whatever. So we each have our own swadharmas. The way the essence of our beings pour out into the world naturally to function as part of a society that serves a culture that supports Krishna Bhakti. This is Daiva Varnashrama. At least, hopefully, we're executing that. And Varnashrama now takes a back seat. In Vedic times, it took a front seat. Back seat, it is secondary. The primary thing is Krishna Bhakti, and Vedic ideals are only executed specifically and individually only as they support the life of Krishna Bhakti, period. When we turn that around, when Krishna Bhakti is to start serving the Vedic Varnashrama vision, that's delusional, because you're not going to have Vedic Varnashram in Kali Yuga. It's impossible. But when that happens, you have lost the life of Krishna Bhakti, and you're simply engaging in a false culture.
That was very strong. Thank you, Sharadi. I'm sure you
A
have
little strong,
something.
but I want both of you to know I don't mind
Yes.
any challenges thrown at me. Okay, in fact, I love it because I grow and I think, and often I'm corrected, but often I can add more to enlightened, to these enlightened kinds of questions, and we can elevate each other in this discussion. So.
Of course, and I'm sure. I mean, you're more than qualified. That's why we wanted you. We thought, we couldn't have this topic discussed, with a more, I don't know, what's a qualified person than you, Prabhu. So, Sharadia, did you have anything to come back? Because I did want to then move on to something very similar but interlinked.
Yes, Prabhu, you mentioned that now, Bhakti, or for us in ISKCON, Bhakti should be the primary focus. And then, Varn Ashram is secondary. But then in Vedic culture, Varn Ashram was kind of in the forefront. So can you give us an example in ISKCON where we have put like the idea of Vedic culture or Varn Ashram in front of Bhakti?
Okay. For my 20 years, I was the first devotee to counsel ISKCON devotees from 1985 to 2005. And then I stopped because there were others that were able to do it, and I would send others there and so on. But I remember one devotee, gentleman, called me up one day after, months of counseling him and his wife. And he said, Garuda, I figured out what the problem with my marriage. I said, oh, okay. Well, we've been at it for a while. This is good. May I ask you what that is? He said, yes, I would love to share with you. I figured it out. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, the problem with my marriage is that my wife is not a Vedic wife. I said, oh my gosh, you figured it out. Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. So now everything is solved, right? She's good. You're good. Everyone's good. He said, I think so. I said, well, great. Well, then you don't need counseling anymore now, do you? He said, I suppose not. I think we have actually figured it out. I said, great. I said, before you go, let me ask you a question. Are you a Vedic husband? And he just didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what a Vedic husband was. He was so concentrating on a so-called Vedic wife, which is code for let me keep her subjugated to my every whim. Now, that is not a Vedic anything, and that's not a Vaishnava anything either. When it's code for let me keep my wife subjugated to my every whim, this is simply abuse. I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's just plain abusive.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that is a common issue that we've seen in ISKCON, that, we might be expecting others to be Vedic while we are not in any way ourselves Vedic. But now for those that, are strongly propagating the importance of Vedic culture, they would often argue that Vedic culture is essential for us to live satwik lives, and that, living a satwik life is required. So, we can come to the mode of goodness and be on that platform. And then from that platform, we can practice bhakti. And without Vedic culture, we will not be living in sattva guna. So how would you respond to that? To that, can we live in a sattvic way, without necessarily following Vedic culture?
Yes. Okay. As Vaishnavis and Vaishnavas, we are all about living the life of the purified heart and the offering of our hearts to Sri Krishna, Sri Radha, and all living beings. We're here to celebrate the love of Sri Radha and Sri Krishna. Now, how we can do this on an individual basis is, again, it's very individual. We can draw some inspiration from Vedic culture. I think a lot of people, for example, if they looked at my relationship with my wife, they might say, well, they seem to live a fairly Vedic life. My wife does not work out in the world. I'm the one who goes out, and in my spoiled profession where I get to teach Krishna Bhakti theology all day long or whatever, and write about it, publish about it, and so on. We are such partners, though, in Krishna Bhakti. For example, also, my wife understands the value of the home temple, of filling the home with, beautiful and pleasurable bhakti experiences, and to have it as a place of creative engagement. And when she was a mother, we're now, past the young parenting phase of things, but when she was a mother, that's what she focused on. Now, maybe that's called a Vedic, woman, a Vedic mother, whatever, but there is no replacement for a mother and a child. I mean, there are reasons why there are women, there are reasons why there are men in the life of a child. It takes both to raise a child in a healthy way. It's the Vedic woman had focused. She was powerful in the home, and she was, that was her domain, and the husband would follow her lead in the home. It's not that the husband cracked a whip in the home. No, she conducted the worship. She was skilled in so many of the arts. She was skilled in the healing methods that were handed down. She made the home beautiful. It was a place also in which devotees could congregate, and so she was the mistress of the home. So the husband was typically the person who would go out of the home and and work in the world. So the woman was more internally focused and the man was more externally focused. Now, that doesn't mean that these are strict borders. A woman can be in the world. A woman can be focused in various ways in the world. And especially in this day and age, again, there can be great flexibility depending upon the individuals, what works for the married couple, for example. So we can't superimpose formulas. And unfortunately, the leadership in ISKCON for the longest time has, in my view, and again, this is just my view, and I'm responsible for my view. My view is that the leadership, and I'm friends with a lot of them, mainly the old ones, not the young ones, but the young ones probably are a little more progressive and, realizing what needs to be done. But in my view, the leadership has been more involved in controlling relationships than providing a place in which relationships can flower naturally in Krishna Bhakti, in a life of Krishna Bhakti. Leadership means not controlling, but leading society, leading the devotees into beautiful opportunities for flowering in their relationships with one another, including within marriage or between one another and sangha and so on. But you cannot adjudicate relationships. You cannot control the way people offer their hearts. This is not to be controlled. Even a god does not control that. Even Krishna, who resides in there, does not control it. If Krishna or anyone lesser could control what we do with our hearts, then that would not be love at all, now would it?
Thank you. That was very beautiful. One other thing that's related to what we just spoke about what's Vedic and what's Vaishnava culture, is devotees, we see this time and time again, conflate the idea of Vedic, Vaishnava, and Indian culture. You see this everywhere with the attire, certain sort of, norms, cultural norms, sort of seeping through into ISKCON. So, India, if you take as a country, has multiple states with unique social dynamics, and also have a long history of
Yep.
invasions, including the Mughals and the occupations of the British. So, can we assume that what we see in India is the Vedic culture or the Vaishnava culture? Because often people think what we see in India is the Vaishnava culture, the Vaishnava attire should be a sari, the tilakon. I get all sorts
Yeah.
of questions and comments all the time. So is that right? What is Vaishnava culture, or should we just take what we see in India, as Vaishnava or Vedic culture?
Okay. Of course, India is the inheritor, is the beneficiary of much of what came so early on in its history, namely the Vedic culture. And so, it's not unnatural to look to India to see how, some of that spills over into its cultural fabric now in modern times, as it's becoming more and more a culture that copies the West and America. And, Bollywood is simply a puppet of Hollywood. And anyway, it just, the mundane culture is easily adopted by India more and more. And we see it. Now, that said, Krishna Bhakti is a life of the heart. And what naturally flows from the heart into externally. And that would also include dress. So it's possible to be a Vaishnava and a very, very sweet and very beautiful, exuberant and luminous Vaishnava in any form of dress, which will naturally be appropriate for that time, place, and circumstance. Prabhupada talked about Desha Kala Patra, place, time, and circumstance. We have to be sensitive to the cultural context in which we find ourselves. And, frankly, I mean, the dhoti kurta or sari or gopi skirt and shawl, I mean, some of that can be really off-putting to people in the West, especially if I wear that. Obviously, I'm not going to wear the gopi skirt. I don't want to worry either of you, and so don't worry about that. But people look at the dhoti as a skirt. I mean, they don't really see it's certainly not pants. So the idea is that Krishna bhakti is not limited. See, now here's the problem. When we begin limiting what can be Krishna bhakti, then we are pursuing something that is less than Krishna bhakti itself. So if you cannot be a Krishna bhakta if you wear civilian clothes, then you are doing just that. Who says? Krishna bhakti is more powerful than this form of dress or that form of dress. It's a matter of what is in one's consciousness and the way we pursue a life of Krishna bhakti and the way it's reflected in our activities, in our life. So, India is not by any means always the model of the way Vaishnava bhaktas should be behaving or adopting in terms of clothing and so on. I mean, Prabhupada was once asked, you may remember this interview with Prabhupada. He was asked, how would you know a Vaishnava when you would see him, And I, of course, when I first heard that question, I was thinking, well, then you have the tilak, you have the kurta, and he said, you can tell a Vaishnava by the fact that he would be a perfect gentleman. And of course, speaking as a sannyasi, he wasn't referring to a woman, but you could say the same thing. You could tell by the fact that she would be a perfect gentlewoman. And that is the definition of a Vaishnava, not tilak dress. And even Rupa Goswami says, a pure devotee can appear to be an ordinary person. For all you know, that's just an ordinary person. But in his or her heart, there is such purity and love flowing from it that you can feel something beyond the physical and bodily dressing.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think that's very thought-provoking, that what makes a person a devotee is really their character and not, anything, not anything external. I think it's important to also, remember, as you said, although we do consider, India very sacred, and we do consider it, I suppose the home of Vedic culture, at the same time, we cannot just blindly accept that everything we see in India today, is still Vedic culture. Now, changing gears a little bit, I want to start looking more specifically at this topic of how women were portrayed, not just in Vedic culture, but in the Vedic scriptures. So we see that there's historical evidence, particularly in the Rig Veda, that show that in early Vedic times, there were women, Rishikesh, I hope I'm saying this correctly, and there was also this idea of Brahma Vadinis, and yes, that was ladies who were scholars and teachers, and they were, respected socially in that position. And we also know that the Rig Veda contains hymns written by 27 female scholars, and among those would be Gargi, Maitreyi, and there's also a lady called Lopamudra. So this leads me to a couple of questions. Firstly, why do we hear so little about these female sages and their contributions? And if they were, if we did have these female scholars, how are women really depicted, in the scripture, in Vedic scripture? Is there only one, one identity for women in Vedic culture and Vedic scriptures?
Yeah, there is not just one identity by any means. And again, especially in bhakti culture, it's completely open. It's whatever a particular woman can offer to the bhakti culture in front of her. The best way she can serve, most naturally. Um, um, just because there were Vaishnavi gurus, in the past, doesn't mean all women should be gurus, for example. I mean, any more than all men. That's like saying all men should get a doctorate from Harvard. Come on. I mean, that's just not what everyone's meant to do. It's about the individual. Bhakti is about the individual heart. It's funny. I remember back in the old days, the Vaishnava calendar would come around, and we have so many days and so many great personages we celebrate. But I used to laugh every time we would come around to celebrating the appearance of Gangamata Goswamini. I said, no one knew who that Goswamini was. I would laugh. I said, wow, I'm waiting for another Goswamini to come visit our temple. Do you know of any, Prabhu? And there were no Goswaminis. And of course, Prabhupada didn't establish a formal Goswamini order as such, but I know women who are, as far as I'm concerned, Goswaminis. I mean, if it sounds like a duck and looks like a duck and quacks like it's going to be a Goswamini. Okay, so I have women, Vaishnavi friends who are very much Goswaminis, in my unhumble opinion. But I eventually looked into Gangamata Goswamini and wrote an encyclopedia article on her and how she was a princess and she gave up everything to be a Vaishnavi and in Radhakund, blah, 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 and so on. The fact is that you can't limit Krishna Bhakti. It's going to go on the way it should go on, despite the constrictions and even the subjugations that take place. They may say, in the leadership, no Vaishnavi gurus. Well, too bad, because there are so many wonderful Vaishnavi gurus. I know them. I hear them. I learn from them. It's impossible to keep Krishna, but the spirit of Krishna Bhakti will blow away any constrictions that are attempted to be applied. So, for example, the GBC leadership once put me on a subcommittee to decide. This was back in the late 80s. They put me on without asking me. They put me on. I think they just felt, Garuda's a scholar, or whatever. And they said this was a committee to decide what disciples of gurus who had gone away should do. So every time this devotee who was in charge of the committee would call, I could see it in call or ID. I would not answer the phone. I said, I'm not going to participate in this. Who am I to say what the broken heart of a disciple should do when her or his guru has departed? Who am I to say? And who are they to say? This is a personal matter. The fact of the matter is that Krishna Bhakti cannot be limited. As soon as we try to limit it, and if we think we're successful in limiting it, we're not practicing Krishna Bhakti anymore. We're practicing a kind of perversion of Vedic Varnashrama. And I mean perverse because it's not the original Vedic Varnashrama. It's my idea of what Vedic Varnashrama was, and I'm trying to apply it artificially now, and it's not working, and it's demoting the highest principle of Krishna Bhakti, which is totally anathema to everything that we're about.
So, Prabhu, the fact that we did have, these female scholars, within the Vedic and the Vaishnava tradition, that then also, from what you're saying, it shows that if we have ladies today who have that inclination, although there might not be so many, because they're not even, that many men that really have, a
That's
very strong inclination to be a scholar. But if there are ladies who have that inclination, um, if I'm understanding you correctly, you say it would actually be against bhakti if we discourage them, to utilize their nature and to, maybe then instead of just being, I mean, not that that's not important, but rather, telling them that they just have to be a homemaker. We should encourage them then to,
Yeah.
study, be in the academia, because that's probably where they could make the best, contribution and also,
Sharadiya Rasa.
reach more fulfillment.
Yeah, Sharadiya Rasa. The key word you mentioned here, to discourage a devotee from engaging in Krishna Bhakti Seva. That is of the nature of aparada. I know we translate aparada, Prabhupada does, offense, but you know what the real meaning of it is? To oppose seva to Radha, essentially, to oppose devotional service. So if I say Sharadiya Rasa, it's not really your place to have podcasts, okay? I really don't think you should be doing this. Really, you've got to stop. And D, same for you. This is not a woman's role. I mean, do you see how perverse and crazy that is? If you have a desire in your heart to serve in this way, to illuminate and educate other devotees, and to offer that to them lovingly and with hope that they will live better lives of Krishna Bhakti, and I'm going to discourage you from doing that, I'm going to discourage you, this is aparad.
Thank you, Prabhu. And another point that's related, so we spoke about Brahmavadinis, but there's also another type of women mentioned in the Vedas that are called Sadyavadus. So
Mm-hmm.
they were, although obviously literate and learned the Shastras, they focused more on learning the sort of house and training in household duties. And there we hear are always being classed as, the ideal wife. So if I'm not incorrect, do correct me if I'm wrong, but Brahmavadinis weren't forbidden from marrying. Some of them did get married, didn't they? But however, the Sudivadas were classed or considered as the ideal wife, and we see this. So what was this? So should they be considered as the ideal wife?
Well, perhaps back then they were. I'm not. When you say ideal according to whom? I mean, men, with a very patriarchal society, men have all kinds of ideas of the way others should be, especially women. Well, maybe women have ideas about the way men should be. I mean, what about that? Why not turn it around? And, when it gets right down to a marriage, for example, and a home, those two persons need to understand fully, honestly, full transparency and disclosure. What do we expect from one another? How can this work together? So I can't know what is an ideal wife for X or Y or Z. They need to figure that out. Relationships are precious miracles. When they are working and flourishing, these are little miracles and blessings from Krishna. And there's no one that can control those relationships to make them right or wrong. I can't steal another a wife from another marriage. I can't. No one can steal me from my marriage. I mean, it's if the relationships are working, they have an internal strength and integrity that would never make that possible. But when we are broken, together, we will attract broken. When we are strong together, we will attract even greater strength. It's just the way things are. And so ideal is very, you see, as soon as we start talking about ideal, then I'm going to start thinking about the way you should be, and the way this one should be, and the way others should be. But the way each of us should be is about an internal kind of relationship that we have with Krishna and our dearest beloveds.
No, thank you. I think this is the thing. You hit the nail on the head. This whenever we start talking about these blueprints and the ideals, and the ideal wife should be this, and I get it time and time again. ISKCON, some male devotees have confided in me. All these Vaishnavis, the devotees, ladies want them to have a house, have a car, have a job, all the ducks in a row, and it's just like, God forbid, if you're not in that finance, if you're especially particularly living in London where I live, I mean, only people, somebody even born and bred in London couldn't even, with a decent job, could hardly get on the housing ladder. So I mean, it just puts immense strain on these blueprints. I think not just on women, we need to talk about how these blueprints are also actually putting so much strain on the Vaishnavas. So I think that's a point that we often don't we don't speak about often. So I think I really appreciate the point that you made about the problems occur when we who's ideal, who calls these kind of different stereotypes almost the
Yes.
ideals, so, and leave these kind of blueprints almost on pedestals. I think it's a very, very important point, so thank you.
Yes. But you know what, Dee? This is the problem. This kind of reductionism. I'm reducing you to a formula. I don't want to understand you, Dee. I just want you to fulfill my idea of what an ideal, woman is. So I don't really care about you. I care really about what the institution is dictating. What this does, this is extremely destructive, and it promotes a culture of depersonalization and impersonalism. It is antithetical to bhakti. Even to control the guru-shishya relationship, it's another problem. And the leadership is facing all kinds of problems with that, because again, these are relationships that evolve naturally. Guru-shishya relationship is a very personal, private relationship. It doesn't belong to the leadership. It's any more than to a married couple belongs to anyone else. Or a parental child relationship. Relationships, if they work in this world, they are miracles and blessings, because it's very hard to find relationships that work in this world. And we shouldn't have them feel like they're working on the basis of institutionalized acceptance and a kind of I'm pleasing the institution, therefore I have a relationship. Honestly, I've the phenomenon of being lonely in the crowd. One can be a part of a huge sangha of a guru family, but if he or she is not receiving the truly heart-to-heart connection that should be there between guru and shishya, or gurvi, okay, that's the feminine gender of guru, gurvi and shishya, then you see, then we're actually starving ourselves while thinking that we're getting nourished. It's kind of like eating only candy. How long can you eat only candy? It seems very sweet on the surface, but what's really going down in the actual, need of the body? We need to be nourished, and that cannot just be done by institutional candy. I apologize. I'm a bit of a rebel, but I'm a rebel in favor of promoting hearts in Krishna bhakti. Is the absolute principle. Anything less is fine if it supports it, but if anything less takes away from it, it should be rejected.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Because you are a rebel, I think we want to ask you a slightly controversial question, and it's something
Yes.
I've been fascinated about. I've got an interest in visual arts, and I have noticed that if you look at ancient Indian artworks, we see that both the goddesses, like Lakshmi, etc., and the women are often depicted very sensually. And we see that they often don't even have their breasts covered, and definitely they don't have their faces covered. They're not, often they're not wearing veils. And I am wondering, how do we reconcile this depiction of women, which is actually quite pervasive, I would say, in ancient art, with the strong emphasis with women needing to cover themselves extensively? And are both these ideas of how women should look in public, are both of them then Vedic?
Well, again, I'm not particularly concerned about what is Vedic. I'm concerned about what is Vaishnava. And if a Vaishnava genuinely feels comfortable and feels that he or she is representing him or herself well with the form of dress that they chose, then I respect that. I respect that. Now, if someone's dressing to try to attract, a partner, and is trying to be seductive subtly and so on, well, then that's going to be reflected in their dress also. But it's possible for a woman to be very, very, beautifully absorbed in Krishna bhakti, and back in the old days, and just have the upper part of the sari covering her breasts, and without anything underneath, like a choli or any kind of underdress, and that was acceptable and for a long time. In the West, the breast has been sexualized. In India, it always represented nourishment and a mother's love for the child, and which is a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. And the problem is when we spoil what is beautiful. It's our human beings. Leave it to human beings to ruin what is beautiful. Okay, I mean, we're always, as a group, tending to do that, especially in Kali Yuga. We have to assert more vigorously what is true and what is beautiful, without being, trampled by the negative. Now, the covering of one's head and this kind of so-called chaste dressing and so on, I think really started happening, in my limited vision on this, and I'm going to ask you to take this tentatively, these historical observations. But from the 9th century on, North India was, controlled by a Muslim culture. And in fact, for 900 years, India was under Muslim domination. And many of those cultural mores kind of influenced India. Whereas India didn't have all these hang-ups about sexuality. I mean, look at the temple of Khajuraho with all the sexuality on the outside of the building and so on. India they weren't hung up. They really weren't hung up. The West were really hung up. White people are really hung up, I'm telling you. And white men are really super hung up. And so, not to speak against my own species here, but the point is that India celebrated humanity in relation to divinity. So, and then, of course, the Muslims were very big on, of course, covering the woman as much as possible. But you know what? That didn't even originate in Islam. Did you know that? Islam adopted that from Byzantine Christianity. It's a mess. Look how we keep promoting, just mess after mess after mess. So in Krishna Bhakti, we have to assert strongly what Krishna Bhakti values are and translate them into practical, worldly, Deshakala Patra considerations.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. And I think what's really like an essential point that you mentioned is that we tend to sexualize certain bodies and, certain bodies, in certain ways. But it's not that those are inherently, sexual, because in certain cultures, it's considered inappropriate to show your lower back. So if your lower back is shown, it's seen as something seductive. And
That's right.
for instance, now in Indian culture currently, it's not seen as sexual if if you're a woman and the side of your body, your waist shows, your stomach shows. It's normal. That's just the way they dress.
Right.
But in other parts of the world, that would be highly problematic. But that just goes to show that we sexualize women's bodies.
Yes.
There's nothing inherently wrong with the body. It's depending on our consciousness. And as you said, in ancient India, they could celebrate the body in relation to divinity, and therefore it wasn't such an issue. Because if you look at those artworks, you always get a sense of joy.
Yes.
Yes, which I find fascinating. There's really this sense of celebrating life.
Yes.
And celebrating who you are.
Yes.
So I do find that very fascinating.
All of that was there, but under 1,100 years of domination, it was bad enough to have 900 years of Muslim culture, and then the British come in. No offense, Dee, I gather you're British. Yeah. Well, anyway, you're not British. Okay, maybe not.
I am, yes, but even if you see but if you go to the Tate Modern or the Tate Britain, you see the evolution of it's the Victorians and the Edwardians that draped themselves. So if you look at ancient, England before the Victorian or the Edwardian times, you see the difference in the paintings. They were not very dissimilar to. I'm also a bit of art buff, so they were not very dissimilar to the art and the sculptures that Shraddha just mentioned in India. So you see that gradual evolution of how people dressed and So in what we call not the dark ages, but before, say, the Industrial Revolution, it was a very different ballpark.
Yeah, it's the issue of dress, of course, is aside from women in dress, dress in general, and I remember when I was in New York, in the New York Temple, when it was in Manhattan, and Prabhupada was there for Rath Yatra. This was 1976, and I remember that there was a group of us in the Bhaktivedanta Institute that were having to go off to a conference, and we were all dressed in suits. And so Prabhupada said, let them give class. And but they said, Prabhupada, but we're in suits. He said, in suits, it's fine. Sit on the asana with the suit, as long as you have the tilak. You see? So you see, dress, it's really a matter of intent and motive and consciousness, as you're both saying. And now, normally, yes, when I go to the temple and I give a Sunday feast lecture, which I'll do on occasion, obviously I don't go in a tuxedo or a bathing suit, mind you. Okay, I go, generally in the kurta and the dhoti, and because in that context, that's what's expected, that's what is accepted, and that in a way it also shows agreement and cooperation, or a certain sense of conformity, which can be healthy. Now I have a godbrother who is a leading devotee, very well known, and he went to Europe and he sat on the asana in khakis, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap. And I called him up. I said, obviously you're trying to make a statement here. Now the question is whether you're really effective in doing it that way. So again, one has to be careful. And then, of course, there's the issue of facial hair, right? Facial hair, right? So I have a very good friend, a god brother, who's a GBC, who won't let me give the Sunday feast lecture because I have a beard. Okay. Whereas the main GBC with whom I work in Potomac, Maryland, Washington, D.C. area, I give lectures there all the time. So you see, people are really funny about this kind of thing. You can't be a Vaishnava spokesman if you have facial hair. Now, of course, I'm in the world, and when devotees used to go out in the world to distribute books, they used to put on wigs. Well, just think of this as a permanent wig. It's just like when you have to wear a wig, you wear a wig. So I've got a permanent wig. Why do I have to put it on and off, on and off, on and off, and so on, and so on? You see, but all of this can get extremely silly and distracting. Wouldn't you rather talk about how Krishna and Balaram tried to go to the Brahmanas to get the offerings that they were, so busy performing rituals for? And of course, they refused. You remember this, Leela, right? And so they went to the right people, the wives of the Brahmanas. Yes, because they knew how to nourish Krishna and Balaram. That's right. The women, if this isn't a statement that women have a greater general, and now I'm making a generalization, which I don't like making, okay? But often women have a greater proclivity to serve from the heart, whereas men can be very heady and very technical and very power hungry, okay? Not that women can't be, okay? I know plenty of women that can be power hungry and also very heady. You can't really make strict divisions this way. But the point is this: woman or not, we are supposed to be nourishing seva to Radha and Krishna. They have been calling us with their divine hearts, with their love, and they have been embracing us for an eternity. Bhakti is about returning their embrace. That's all. That's our only business. And whatever helps you and I, whatever helps you and me to return that embrace, that is what we should do. It's nothing to do with gender, although that could be a consideration, on a small level. But ultimately, it has nothing to do with returning the embrace. Am I too heavy, ladies? Am I too heavy on this, or
No,
is this?
no. I'm loving it. I hope the audience is enjoying it. We've had some very good comments and feedbacks, which we can go to. But Sharadia, I think you have a bit of another controversial question at hand. Not controversial, something that we always talk about.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Yes, Prabhu. So it seems that after Srila Prabhupada's departure, certain devotees developed a fascination with, other Vedic scriptures, among them being the Manusmriti. And I find it quite a fascinating text. I don't know how many devotees actually, read the actual translation, but when I was doing research about this topic about women's position in Vedic culture, I saw that a lot of scholars stated that the broad acceptance of Manusmriti drastically changed, the social position of women in India. And I would say it's very common that they attribute, any subjugation and suffering, social suffering that women experience in India. They're often connected to, people accepting Manusmriti. Just to give audience an idea of what some of it sounds like. So this is a translation, a verbatim translation of some of the passages of Manusmriti, and this is with regards to the duties of married women towards a husband. So it states, though he may be bereft of virtue, given to lust, and totally devoid of good qualities, a woman should always worship a husband like a god. For a woman, there's no independent sacrifice, vow, or fast. A woman will be exalted in heaven by the mere fact that she has obediently served a husband. A good woman, desiring to go to the same world as a husband, should never do anything displeasing to the man who took a hand, whether he is alive or dead. For they, women, pay no attention to beauty. They pay no heed to age, whether he is handsome or ugly. They make love to him with the single thought he is a man. Lechery, fickleness of mind, and the hard-heartedness are innate in them, even when they are carefully guarded in this world. Therefore, they become hostile towards their husbands. Recognizing thus the nature produced in them at creation by Prajapati, a man should make the utmost effort at guarding them. Bed, seat, ornaments, lust, hatred, behavior of unworthy of an Arya, malice, and bad conduct. Manu assigned these to women. I mean, and there is much more, I would say, severe parts. I just thought this will give us an idea. So,
yes.
Oh,
well, the Manusmriti, I'm pretty sure that the Manusmriti was written by a woman, don't you think? I'm playing with you. Okay, now look. First of all, the Manusmriti, going to any other scriptures, period, one has to know how to navigate through any other scriptures other than the ones that Prabhupada gave us. Already, devotees are extremely distracted by even bona fide, we say, right? Even the scriptures of our own acharyas in our own line, even they, I see, are causing a lot of distraction and even confusion, because they read things there that don't seem like they jive completely with what Prabhupada is. So now they're one, you have to be qualified to go into these different scriptures, even with our own lineage, what to speak of outside our lineage. Now, let me just give you Jiva Goswami's viewpoint. He says that all these scriptures are tainted and corrupted. He says even the Mahabharata is corrupted. But the Bhagavata Purana is known as the Amala Purana, the pure, without taint, without anything, tainting it, I guess is the best way to say. Without impurity, there it is. Without impurity, the Amala Purana. So even among the 18 Puranas, the Bhagavata Purana is the purest. So this is where we are supposed to go. We are not supposed to go to the Manusmriti. I wholesale reject the Manusmriti. Unless there's something in there that can be engaged in, guess what? Krishna Bhakti Seva. When it can't be engaged, I reject it wholesale. So what you just read, I mean, honestly, I was getting kind of excited when you were reading about how the woman should, I was going to bring my wife in, and I said, honey, you listen to this. I think we need to change things around here, let's have an evening worship of me with the fan, right? Get me fanned and let me. Anyway, I got excited, honestly, for about a minute, that I restrained myself and decided not to call her in and to establish these standards of the Manusmriti. The standards that we have here and that we all should have anywhere we are the standards of Mahaprabhu Gauranga. However your heart is moved to serve Krishna and his beloved Radha, this is what you are to be absorbed in, and whatever that entails. Period. If in a particular relationship one honors one's husband as a guru pati, a pati guru, fine. That might be in some marriages. I have a letter from Prabhupada where he's not to someone else though, where her husband finally got a Brahmin initiation where she already had it, and she's writing to Prabhupada saying, well, how should he get how should he hear the Gayatri mantra? And Prabhupada said, well, you can give it to him. You act, on my behalf, and you give it to him. Oh, shameful. Oh my God, a woman giving Gayatri mantra to a man. I mean, I can't tolerate that. There's no limit. We cannot limit Krishna bhakti. Prabhupada on the one hand toted the line. There was a certain level of formality and adherence to kind of, patriarchal execution of a lot of things here, and well, not a lot of things, but here and there. But you know what? When it came to his personal dealings with his disciples, there were no limits. I believe one of his servants, very close servant to Prabhupada, came and said, "Prabhupada, I've been married, but actually I'm not heterosexual. I basically was saying in so many words, I'm a homosexual. I feel like having a male mate." And he said, "Then find yourself an appropriate male partner and keep serving Krishna, as long as this will only increase your service to Krishna." I was right there when Rupanuga Swami was in a sannyas garb. I knew him well back in the day. He wrote to Prabhupada asking if he could return to his wife. He felt he could preach better. He didn't feel he was rightly situated as a sannyasin. And he waited for Prabhupada's response. Prabhupada wrote back saying, "Well, technically it's considered a fall down," or something like that. So, but if you go back to your wife and you can really teach Krishna bhakti more vigorously and better and with greater strength, then by all means go back. You see, we have to move out of this tendency to reify everything. There's no easy formula for Krishna bhakti except Krishna bhakti itself. Everything becomes complicated when you start imposing something that's less than Krishna bhakti on Krishna bhaktas. And that's called aparad. That's obstructing the worship of Radha and Krishna.
I think a follow-on question, sorry, Prabhu, that you mentioned was that, with Prabhupada, what we didn't cover, which you slightly touched upon now, was that how Prabhupada dealt with these idea of Vedic woman, or because we've clearly seen instances where he encouraged women to have families, become mothers, so that's so-called sort of traditional idealized, sort of idealistic, roles and responsibilities for women. But equally on other occasions, he did encourage women, if he saw their talents, he did encourage others to kind of pursue their various forms of services. So as a whole, taking Prabhupada's sort of the experiences you've had with Srila Prabhupada, do you think he was inclined or favored one option or the other, or was it a very much a personalistic sort of nature that he had?
It's the latter. It is very personalistic. I mean, Prabhupada could sound at times formulaic. Okay, let's just be perfectly straightforward about this. Prabhupada can sound formulaic about things, but if you look at his whole teachings and the way he interacted with his disciples, he ultimately really was not formulaic. He may start with a formula, kind of a general principle, but then when it came to particular persons, everything was adjustable in Krishna bhakti, as long as it added up to greater entrance into the life of Krishna bhakti. Everything was negotiable.
But a follow-on question I had was, sometimes you said Prabhupada was sometimes formulaic and sometimes kind of reinforce the idea of these traditional values. So I know that we accept Prabhupada's statements, which are as universal truths related to Vaishnava philosophy. But if you disagree with some of his personal opinions about social and cultural positions of women, can we then consider ourselves as devout followers of Prabhupada, or would that contradict our position, so to speak?
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, no, I mean, again, this is, first of all, when we look at Prabhupada's teachings, you're never going to get something that is absolutely absolute. I know that sounds funny, but you're never going to get. In fact, Prabhupada will assert something in a very kind of absolutistic fashion in one place and totally contradict it in another place. And he does this many, many, many times because he was a dramatic teacher, you know? He'll, on the one hand, he will say, there is no love in this world. There's absolutely no love in this world. And then in another place, he'll see some kittens playing by his feet. I remember there was some anecdote playing, and he said to the devotees there, just see, there's love everywhere. I mean, part of the problem in all of this is understanding Prabhupada's form of discourse, which is very, very complex and subtle. And I'm currently writing something on this for publication. And, I've heard devotees argue with Prabhupada's statements to another devotee who is arguing back Prabhupada's statements. It's fighting Prabhupada with fighting someone else with Prabhupada and fighting that person with Prabhupada. It's absurd. It's absurd. The problem is when we take things as a singular, isolated edict of some kind, without taking into consideration other statements or what to speak of the whole of the bhakti philosophy, then it is a tamasa guna assertion. But when we take the one assertion, not in isolation and as if it were absolute, when we take that one assertion and see it in light of other contrary or agreeing positions or statements, then that is more of a rajasa interpretation. But when we are able to see that one assertion, not only in light of other assertions, but in light of the whole of the philosophy, this is satwika. This is a satwika guna interpretation. And I'm afraid that's a little rare, but we can help each other get there. Now, true, the satwika interpretation, the satwika vision of it is the vision of an uttama bhakta. And I've heard people say, well, come on, Garuda, I'm not an uttama bhakta. I'm barely out of a kanishta stage. I'm probably still in a, you know what? That's no excuse, because together we can help each other lift one another up to higher understandings. If we understand the principles of what a kanishta interpretation is, a madhyama interpretation, and an uttama interpretation of scripture is. You don't have to be an uttama bhakta to have an uttama understanding, excuse me, on a particular issue. For example, when you go on the altar with Radha and Krishna to serve Radha and Krishna, you are effectively stepping into the shoes of a pure devotee, although we don't wear shoes on the altar, but you know what I'm saying. You are effectively serving Radha and Krishna directly. I mean, what you are in effect functioning as a Mahabhagavata. Does that mean you have to have all of you as a Mahabhagavata? We are learning by practicing the Uttama vision of our philosophy. We have to help each other rise to that Uttama understanding and not be content to simply be promoting a kind of contaminated understanding and very isolating understanding of the philosophy that doesn't inspire others, but discourages others in engaging in devotional service. This is our task. This is our task. Mm-hmm. That's why I appreciate a forum like yours. I think that both of you are trying to do that. You're both looking and trying to find the Uttama vision. And I think that's a very marvelous seva.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. And I think, as you said, although we might know that we're very far from being an Uttama Adhikari, we can still strive to, develop that understanding. Because as you mentioned, in many cases, if we want to do service, we kind of, for the sake of that service, we need to, step up, to that platform. Now, another controversial topic, which I think we would need to take such a Uttama perspective on. And I find this, again, fascinating. I saw an online exhibition from the American Institute of Indian Culture, and it was showing a collection of ancient Indian artworks in which both goddesses and women were wearing the sacred thread. Now, this exhibition states that the Upanayana, this sacred thread ceremony, was initially meant for both boys and girls, and that it was only later limited to boys. And again, they attributed this to the growing prominence of the Manusmriti. So they also said that in India, in the recent past, there's been news of this ceremony again being offered for young girls because they are seeing it as, like a sacrament for indicating that girls should have access to, to education. So we know that equal opportunity for people of all genders is becoming a very prominent issue in society. So given that, should ISKCON consider revising practices as only allowing men to receive the sacred thread? Because that is done in the name of Vedic culture. Like if we ask, like I asked, why do only men receive the sacred thread when receiving Brahmana initiation? And I was told that's just the way it's done because that is Vedic culture. So should we start revising such practices?
So, of course, the first thing we all have to ask is that advantageous in further promoting Vaishnava culture, Krishna Bhakti Seva? Is there some great advantage of the Upanayana, the sacred thread? That is a ritualistic, external dimension of what is truly internal and truly sacred. It's really not the thread that's sacred. The thread was sacred more back in Vedic times. The thread now is not that sacred. What is sacred is that the woman gets all 7 of the Gayatri mantra, all 7 lines of the Gayatri. And the 7th line of the Gayatri is known as the Kama Gayatri, and it is the sound of Krishna's flute. Is there anything higher than the sound of Krishna's flute? If you can tell me of something higher than that, then I'll eat my bead bag. This is the essence. The fact that Prabhupada took chances. He gave women the Gayatri mantra. He came to the West and made brahmanas. I mean, he knew that he would be criticized for this. And yet he did it anyway because it infused. Gayatri mantra is the real initiation between guru and shishya, and it's the consummation of that connection. And as Jiva Goswami speaks about it, and so that's the gift. I remember being in a situation where I couldn't pull my sacred thread out. I was, my shirt's tucked in. I mean, honestly, it's not a very, practical thing. Okay. So I'm in an academic conference. It's 12 noon. I've got to chant Gayatri mantra. What am I going to do? Okay. I'm going to get undressed. Okay. Let me get undressed here. Okay. Wait a minute. Where is it? Okay. Here it is. Okay, good. Now, and then, I'm pulling this thread out and everyone's looking at, that's just not the right thing to do. So you just very discreetly, with hand covered, and you're counting away and you are absorbed in the Gayatri mantra. This is the point. The thread is not the point. The mantra is the point. Now, if women feel that, hey, you know what, we have equal rights, we want, I mean, again, then, Prabhupada did not offer the sacred thread to his female shishyas. So in ISKCON, obviously, the thing to do would probably, it is a Prabhupada established society. And so to me, it's not that big a deal. I can't imagine why a woman would feel that they're missing something by not having the sacred thread, but they might, and of course, I'd be open to that. But, and I certainly, in my female disciples, I don't offer them a sacred thread. Though my initiations are completely independent from ISKCON authority, but I just don't, because I don't think it's that important. I even tell my male disciples, look, don't take your sacred thread out if it's like going to look weird. We're in the West here. Okay. Now, if you want to do that in India, everyone knows what's sacred. Well, actually, you know what? Even then, people, even in India, it's becoming kind of like you're weird if you even wear a kurta in India these days. So things have changed. It's about being sensitive to one's environment, but no one can take the mantra away from you. No one can take that away from you. No one can control your heart. No one can tell you not to offer your heart totally to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. And that's what the Gayatri mantra is all about. It's a powerful, powerful mantra. And by the way, back in Vedic times, it was only the Brahma Gayatri. The first line, it was only the Brahma Gayatri. It wasn't the other lines. The other lines are Vaishnava Gayatri. So when you talk about that period, you're talking about the Brahma Gayatri. Did that respond, or did I mean, either of you can push me further if I'm not addressing something you really want to hear,
No, I do think you're right, Prabhu. The essence is definitely not the thread. The essence is the mantra. And
Yes.
Prabhupada did, make that adjustment to give, the mantra to his female disciples. I think, though, that the issue potentially, personally, I don't have an issue with this, but just given the current state, of the world now, with regard to this issue of gender equality, I think what the issue would be is not that the women would say that, for us, it's really about getting the thread, but it's the fact that when they don't have the thread and the men do have the thread, some people will use that, as a means of justifying that they are superior. And it's the same with, we can argue that it's not important that the GBC really pushes, for women to be able to be Diksha gurus. And we can argue the same, but it doesn't really matter, because whether the GBC, approves it or not and makes it official or not, women will act as gurus anyway. But
Right.
Again, the fact that, if the GBC does not make that official, some people will continue to use that as proof that women are, in all ways inferior. So I think that's what it's more about. It's not about that they necessarily want the thread or the position, but it's to get more support and clarity for we don't actually discriminate based on the fact that you are a woman. So I think that's what it's actually about for, when it comes to these details.
Any person who uses the privilege of having a sacred thread, which is relatively superficial and ritualistic anyway, but uses that to put down other devotees, is a devotional crime. We're not here to use the devotional process to put down other people in the devotional process. In fact, you know what? Back in the early days, men stood on one side of the temple room, women stood on the other side. We never had any problems. But then suddenly women started going to the back. And I pushed for changes on that. And temple presidents were hesitant for whatever reason. So you know what I did? I started standing in the back. I stood in the back with the women. They weren't very comfortable with that, but I was sort of in between the two, right? And of course, being the senior devotee, typically there, it's so funny to see the young brahmachari with the ghee lamp, and they're looking around for like, okay, who's more senior? And oh my God, there's Garuda Prabhu way in the back. I don't know if I should go back there. All these women back there with him, And so, I'm a rebel. I'm a rebel for the cause of Krishna Bhakti, untainted Krishna Bhakti. I'm not saying that I have that, but I'm in the direction. I want to move in the direction of that. Do I need authorization for initiating disciples? No, but ISKCON says that I do need that. first of all, I can't. I mean, I've had God brothers plead with me, begging me to go through the process, and I said, well, there are several reasons why I can't. One is that I'm a scholar of the tradition, and I can't be on any list of gurus. And secondly, I don't want to be on a list of gurus. Well, what is this list of gurus? And third of all, I've never wanted to accept disciples formally in the Diksha sense, but the few that I have, the 6, 8, or whatever, I can't even remember how many I have. They refuse to go anywhere else. So what am I supposed to do? They're sitting on my doorstep. I mean, they won't go anywhere else. They tried to go elsewhere, but they see something in me that defies any kind of compliance with the ISKCON law. One initiating God brother of mine called me up and said, I'm really concerned that you have these rogue initiations. I laughed, of course, when I heard the term rogue initiations. And I said, well, rogue is a relative term, Swamiji. You see, you're compliant with a system that Prabhupada never, ever installed. This is an invention of the GBC. My approach, which frankly I was never intending, I never had any aspirations for that kind of a relationship, mainly the Shiksha level. But the way I'm doing it, it happened naturally. The way it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. What you're doing only happened in the last few decades. So actually, I consider your initiations rogue from the way it's always been done. No one can limit the power of Krishna Bhakti. When Krishna Bhakti rises up, even an institution cannot stop it. There are female God sisters of mine who are just wonderful Vaishnavis, and they teach beautifully, and they're extremely. I learned from them, by the way. I mean, I learned things from them. I learned from my wife. My wife teaches things to me all the time. I love having a teaching partner in my wife. Now, she's not being a very good Vedic wife, is she? Really? I guess not. I'm going to read her that Manusmriti quote later and see if we can shift things around a bit. So thank you for that piece of valuable Shastra.
Thank you, Prabhu. I just wanted to. Thank you so much for everybody watching the podcast today. We've got a lot of questions, but I just wanted to pick one point because we did talk a lot about heart of everything. You emphasized on the point that at the heart of everything we do should be Krishna Bhakti, and anything that takes away the Varnashram Dharma or artificially trying to follow this Vedic Varnashram system, in Kali Yuga time, there's going to be somewhat
Yes.
distracting to our practice of Krishna consciousness. So we've got a question that's asking, how do we avoid just getting swept away by the current and ever shifting values and cultures if we don't have a fixed and scientific satwik way of life? Because some people, often I've heard, people have told me this, the Varnashram Dharma, as in not the Deva Varnashram, the Varnashram system is a disciplined way of life that keeps us on the straight and narrow sort of thing. So I think that's probably what they're trying to get to. So how do we avoid getting swept away by these ever-changing cultural shifts without a strict code of conduct, so to speak?
Okay. Yeah, good. Well, first of all, hopefully one has a guru who can help, disciples navigate through understanding what of the Vedic model is valuable and applicable now and what is simply not, and what is mundane that may have some influence that we don't want, the different forces that are out there, the misconceptions that other devotees have due to, some need to work their own inadequacies out through others. I mean, there are all kinds of forces that come to one. Again, this is why the relationship with the guru is so important, because Because if the guru, and of course, I don't define guru narrowly. I define the guru as from whomever is speaking to you that lifts you up and gives you clarity and makes you happy in Krishna Bhakti. That's guru. I don't care who that is, So navigating through these different forces, D, it's about clarity and the power of that clarity. And hopefully that clarity can come from one who possesses it. And you and I will benefit from that. That's where it starts. That's the whole point of guru. Guru, as we all know, means heavy. In poetics, there are light syllables and heavy syllables. Laghu means light, and guru means heavy syllable. Well, the heavy syllable is something that's held twice as long as the light. So guru is supposed to sound things twice as long as any mundane kind of knowledge. Guru is supposed to afford clarity and shelter for devotees, and to instill in a devotee such a strength of clarity that they will not be influenced by negative outside mundane society forces, or be able to actually take anything that's valuable on the outside, which there could be, to be able to be discerning. And the same thing with the inside. The negative forces coming from the inside and troubled devotees imposing their troubles on us. We need to be able to navigate through that and be able to either address it if we can elevate them to a higher understanding, or remove ourselves if it's just having a destructive effect on ourselves or others, and both. So, again, the Gita teaches us about buddhi yoga, the yoga of discernment, the ability to see what is more valuable than something else and what is destructive, what lifts us up and others up, or what brings us down, what drains us.
No, thank you. I hope the viewer at home got a response to that. Shraddha, did you want to pick any other questions? I know we've got a lot of questions and comments. Thank you so much. But in the interest of time, I think we might have to just pick one or two more. So
my afternoon is open. Yeah, I know yours is in the evening, but I'm open, and I'm here to serve you both with these wonderful and important, frankly, in some cases, vital questions.
we did cover lots of answers, I think, naturally. So we're just trying to pick out those points that we didn't quite address.
Yeah. And if you need, there can always be a part 2 if you need, if that would be helpful.
I'd very much love that. Thank you.
If you need, after today, you might say, you know what, Sharadia Rasa, I think we had our fill of Garuda, there was just so much we could take of that fellow. So, and that would be perfectly fine. I would understand that too. So.
So Prabhu, in relation to what we just discussed, sometimes we hear if it seems that we are not valuing Varna Ashram Dharma, or maybe devotees might make a statement as, for my life, my social conditioning, my culture, I don't really think that, living according to Varna Ashram is going to be practical. Then in response to that, often we hear, and someone in the comments also made this statement, they said, but it's Krishna's system, because, sometimes you were mentioning we cannot live necessarily according to a blueprint, and we shouldn't, think that we have to, follow Varnashram in a very rigid way. But how do we respond to someone saying, but isn't that Krishna's system? Isn't that Krishna's blueprint? Because he does say in Bhagavad Gita, he says that he created the system. Yes. So how do we respond to that?
Chaturvarnyam maya shrishtam, right? And so on. I think it's chapter 4, verse 9, I think, maybe. Anyway, right in there. Well, first of all, the very first word of the Bhagavad Gita is dharma. The very first word. And the last word in Krishna's ultimate instructions is relinquish any form of dharma. Now, how do you figure that? How do you figure that? See, right there, you see, right in that healthy tension. So dharma is to be embraced on the inside in terms of one's nature, the way it flows on the outside into activities in this world, and according to Desha Kalapatra, according to different circumstances, psychophysical nature, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other hand, when one has reached the heart of the divine, all that is secondary. All that is secondary. In love, everything recedes. Our tradition is a tradition of the heart. We are here to cultivate love. How many times did Prabhupada use that phrase? Love of God? Thousands. Okay? That's the point of all of this. If we're using what Prabhupada gives us to distract us from love of God, would he be happy? My opinion is no. That's my opinion. His whole purpose was to cultivate happy, resilient, vibrant devotees with hearts that brim over with love. And Mahaprabhu's example as a Bhaktavatara, his example is that we would contain so much love in our hearts in this life, so much so that it could no longer be sustained within a physical body. And so a bhakta necessarily must die from this life to be able to accommodate such a heart that's so full that it transcends any physical form. And this is the example of Mahaprabhu. He had so many meltdowns. I mean, just read this, right? The Chaitanya Charitamrita. He has so many meltdowns in loving Krishna, right? This was his example. We need to cultivate those meltdowns. Look, in the valuable catechismal dialogue between Ramananda Roy and Mahaprabhu, I don't know how many dozens and dozens and dozens of verses are spoken there, but the first two are spoken about Varnashrama, and never to be returned to that again in all of the dozens and dozens and dozens of verses in that dialogue. Does that tell you something? We are a tradition of the heart, unambiguously, unequivocally, absolutely. We are a tradition of the heart. Nothing can take that away from us. But we at times tend to do things that distract from that. But we already have the distractions of the material world. Why do we need to add distractions to that from our devotional world? This becomes a problem. So we have to help each other. Prabhupada said, choose your sangha carefully, because that will lift you up. That will help all of us rise to more rajasa and satwika understandings of the philosophy, to a more uttama level. Let us keep doing that. That's what we're here to do.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I also recall that when I spoke to you initially about having this session, you mentioned that you feel that Varnashram Dharma means that we create the life that's going to facilitate our devotional service. So it's as simple as that, and that's going to be very unique and individual to each person. But that also requires, I think, more introspection. And also taking responsibility for our lives, instead of just kind of blindly following, kind of an institutional norm. that might not actually work, for us, especially in the long term. Now, to conclude our discussion, I thought we could just maybe respond to a question from one of the members in the audience that kind of, brings us back to where we started. And this is a question from Michelle. I hope Michelle is still with us. And she asked, how do we reconcile being off the body platform while also working with our gendered natures? Do I need to go beyond thinking I am a woman in order to be off the body platform, or can I be both? And I think this is something a lot of devotees are struggling with. Like, we know we are not the bodies. We know we should be off the body platform, but at the same time, we feel that often our gender, maybe for other people something else, but it's very much, I would say, almost enmeshed with our identities, even as devotees. So how would you respond to that?
Yes. In the quickest and briefest way, I would say that we should not pretend that we don't have a particular kind of body. And by the way, there are many male bodies, there are many female bodies. So again, this binary distinction of male, female these days is, being challenged. But again, those basic categories are there, but they're varieties. And it really comes down to, again, paying attention to the individual. And so I don't know the person who is asking the question, but in general, it's a good thing to say, yes, as Prabhupada gave us that formula, I'm not this body, I'm spirit soul, aham brahmasmi. Okay, fine. Now, I'm not this body, but whatever body, vehicular form I have been given, I will give it all to Krishna. Atma nivedana means I offer everything I have. And now I have this body, I have this temporary custodianship. I'm the custodian of this body. I have very little control over the body. This body, thank goodness, is healthy, even in my nice, ripe old age. So I keep going. But so whatever I have, young body, old body, female, male, whatever, let me give all of it to Sri Radha and Krishna. Let me serve all the devotees' hearts. Let me worship at the heart, at the altar of everyone's hearts. Krishna, let me do this. Let me serve the Vaishnavas. I know that you love that devotee who serves and pleases the other Vaishnavas. Let me serve their hearts, because I know you're in there and I can worship you in their hearts with whatever I have, however it's appropriate, without being disruptive. But that's my desire. So again, it's about the heart. Don't put too much emphasis on the body, put more emphasis on the heart, and let the heart guide the body, whatever that body does and is capable of.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that is a very beautiful note to end our podcast with, to say that we should be guided by the heart and let the heart dictate, how we can serve with our bodies. We've had a lot of appreciation being expressed for your presence here, and we also have had some of the audience say that they would love for you to come back for part 2. And we do know, as an academic, you are very busy, but we definitely will be very happy for you to come back. So we're very grateful for everyone that joined the discussion tonight. I do encourage you to also connect with Garuda Prabhu. I think it's the best way to connect with you through your website, Prabhu.
I have a disciple running that, so he would forward emails to me. I'm on Facebook. Sometimes I call that disgrace book, but it's not everyone is on Facebook. So, try writing through the website, garudadas.com website. That should make it. Yeah. And then, if you want me to come back and we can just respond to questions and go deep in those questions. I know that sometimes doing these podcasts can be very quick in responding to questions, but we could go deeper in those kinds of things. So anyway, I'm happy to return, since I like you very much, Sharadiya Rasa, and you too, Dee. So you're both fun to work with, and it'd be a pleasure to come back if you want.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. We're really very honored to have you as a guest speaker and to be enlightened. And as you said, our whole purpose is to come together and to look at questions and issues and try and discuss it from various perspectives, and
Yes.
take into consideration everything that Prabhupada has said and everything in the Shastra to develop that, as you said, like the satwik understanding, and to try and see things from the level of the Uttama. So thank you for assisting us in this process, and thank you for everyone that joined us online. And we will see everyone again in 2 weeks' time for episode 7 of the Many Moons podcast, and then we will be having a special session. It's going to be the day after Lord Nishinga's appearance day, so we're going to have a session of Chitti Shakti on the many faces of Lord Nishingadev. So please do tune in again to join us for that session. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.